Hi, and welcome to the Essential HR Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Gorman, and we're here today with Jeff Makries from Surf Broadband Solutions, and we're going to talk about employee engagement and employee morale right now in regards to COVID-19 and what's happening with the pandemic. And wanted to introduce Jeff to all of you. And Jeff, if you wouldn't mind, maybe for the listeners out there, just a little bit about yourself and what you do and what your experiences have been, and kind of maybe start there for us.
Sure. So I'm the HR manager for Surf Broadband Solutions. Been with the company for a little over a year and a half now. Prior to that, I spent 10 years in human resources in either the food and beverage industry or recruiting. And so I'm at this juncture in my life where, I've been able to jump on with a really great company. And I foresee myself staying here for quite some time now. So that's where I'm currently at the moment.
Very cool. That's awesome. I know we talked earlier about, what's going on and how the pandemic kind of obviously caught us all off guard, but maybe to get started, maybe talk a little bit about that first day and maybe take us back to, for you guys, how that all, I guess, went down and how, what you guys did from an employee perspective to kind of deal with the changes that just kind of hit us square in the face,
Sure. So, prior to the first executive orders, the stay-at-home orders being handed out, obviously there was something, we all knew something was brewing, and we were doing our best in the days leading up to that, the weeks leading up to that, to monitor that situation as best as we could, mainly monitoring the CDC and WHO websites and trying to create as much of a proactive plan as possible. So when stuff did happen as it did, we were as prepared as we could be. So on the days, right around, March 15th, 16th, when those orders were handed down in our states of operation, which is Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois, we had a fairly decent plan in place at that point. So it was easy to enact that, making sure that those office staff that were going to need to work from home had everything that they needed in order to be successful and productive working from home on a daily basis. And then all the while making sure that our technicians out in the field, whether they're commercial or residential technicians who were working with customers' internet service, making sure that they had all of the necessary things needed for protection as well. Gloves, hand sanitizer, disinfectant spray, all that sort of stuff. We all know that those items, the demand for those items shot into the stratosphere, within a matter of 1 to 2 days.
Sure.
And so that was particularly challenging for us to make sure that all of our technicians were properly stocked with that type of PPE from the word go. But I think our company as a whole pulled together, and as anyone saw it in the store, we bought it as much as we were able to, and dispersed it amongst our offices in which we were able to buy it. And so that turned out to be challenging, but all in all, I don't think we ever had technicians without that type of stuff. And then once we were able to find steady providers that would be able to supply us with those things, that became much more easy to keep our technicians stocked with ample amounts and not just a day-to-day basis of it.
No, that's great. So what do you think the employee morale was like when we first got the order to stay home? Do you think that what did you notice? What did you see from your employees? Can you maybe describe that a little bit?
Yeah, there were definitely tons of questions as far as how we were going to operate as a company, how we were going to operate as individuals, and what that meant for us moving forward, because who knew how, when the stay-at-home orders were handed down and announced, there was a tentative plan as far as what that was going to look like in the immediate future, but long-term, none of us knew.
Right.
And, I think still to a point now, none of us know how it's going to affect us, in the long run. But at that very moment, in the first couple of weeks of the orders, the last couple of weeks of March, the 1st of April, there were lots of questions. And one of the things that we put into place very quickly was a policy on paper as far as how we were going to operate day to day.
Mm.
And I think our proactiveness in trying to create a plan ahead of time was very helpful in that, because anybody in HR knows that, to write, fine tune, approve, and then implement any sort of policy company-wide is sort of a long process. You need a lot of feedback from many different people in order to make sure that you're going to get the total buy-in that you need to, as well as still create the policy as it needs to be implemented.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, Monday, this I think was March 16th. That was the day I began putting pen to paper, if you will, with all of the stuff that we had in our thoughts and our heads and stuff that we unofficially been doing, putting
Mm-hmm.
that all on paper. And by Wednesday, that was implemented. And so that created a lot of clarity for all of our staff, whether it was our technicians and how we were operating to keep them safe, what we were doing with our staff working from home,
Mm-hmm.
and how they were going to work together on a regular basis to make sure that we were all continuing to operate. Being an internet service provider, we're an essential business.
Right.
We didn't have the ability to close. We didn't want to, but also we just didn't have the ability to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Mandated by each of the 3 state governments in which we operate. So
Sure.
we didn't have the opportunity to kind of sit back and see how things would play out and gradually work our way back into it. We had to do this while we were still operating. And so I think to get the feedback necessary from everybody who this was going to impact, as well as being able to implement this and get the buy-in from all of our staff as far as how that policy was written and the crisis response that we put on paper, to have that implemented by, just the middle of that first week, I think is a testament to how well we all bought into this right off the bat.
No, that's amazing. Now, a question I had as you were talking there. So, how did you manage? Obviously, so I'm in We're both here in Indiana, with Michigan and Illinois, and the states had different. We're opening at different times, and the
Yep.
governors had different, stages, right? How did you manage that part of it with different employees in different states?
So I think it was a matter of setting expectations right from the start. Part of that crisis response that we put on paper very early on was the expectation that the company, while operating as a whole, may not operate in the office as a whole based on how each state reacted to the stay-at-home orders, and then how quickly that curve flattened, and we would react, kind of state by state, if you will, as that happened. So I think the first positive signs we saw were in Indiana. As we all know, Michigan was an incredibly large hotspot right from the start.
Right.
That was in the top 3 of worst hotspots in America within those first few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And Indiana, we saw improvement first, and that was as we got into middle of June. And so we addressed how to operate in Indiana first, and then as we've seen improvements in Michigan and in Illinois, as well as the slide backs, if you will, when everything starts to open back up and you see that spike that we all anticipated,
right?
We addressed that on a state by state basis as well, because obviously if numbers are really 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 good in one state, they may not be really, really good in another state, and we don't want to put those staff members at risk simply because we're able to operate more from the office, possibly in a state that's showing really good numbers at that point.
No, absolutely, just incredible job. Now, how maybe looking back on it, what's one thing that you maybe wish you would have done differently? I guess with the initial part of it, getting the troops rallied and kind of a game plan in place. Is there anything you would have maybe changed?
That's hard to say.
Yeah.
Hindsight's always 2020. So looking back, there's always something that you feel you could have done differently. I think maybe putting that plan that I talked about, that crisis response plan on paper, right, before everything happened, and pushing a little harder to have that solidified as a just in case scenario that's already on paper and already implemented. That probably could have been a bit more helpful. I think we still did a great job getting that out as we did. But at the same point, having that clarity ahead of time so we could reference that as we put the plan out as far as who was going to work from home and who was going to continue to work in the field and how those operations would continue. That might have been a little bit better on our side from a management standpoint.
Sure. So it seems like with how did your employees adjust to working from home? How did you keep them engaged, I guess? How did that process work for you? Any I guess suggestions or ideas that you have for other organizations on how to keep your employees engaged when they are working from home?
I think we all adjusted fairly well. One of the things we did early on was even conversations that I would normally have over the phone, I started having via video conference.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it was just a short, it could be no more than a 5 or 10 minute discussion that would easily be taken care of over the phone. A lot of us started using video conferencing like Google Hangouts or Zoom or whatever the case may be, to just have that interaction because it kept the face-to-face interaction going as much as possible. Now that doesn't come quite as close to just being able to walk down the hallway and knock on an office door of somebody I need to speak to. But at the same point, it still created more face-to-face interaction than a simple phone call would. And I think that went a long way in keeping us all engaged. Rather than doing conference calls, we did Google Meet meetings. Now, when we're all working from our own home, or those of us who are back in the office are still working from our own office and very hesitant to crowd a lot of people into one conference room, your screen can look like an episode of Hollywood Squares, as I've said.
Exactly.
But at the same point, that face-to-face interaction and being able to see the reactions of people, the facial reactions of people as you make a point in the meeting or make a suggestion or ask a question, that goes a long way to still doing a lot to show that overall communication, because what is it, 90% of all communication is nonverbal.
Right.
You lose that when you're just talking on the phone.
Right.
And so to be able to keep at least a semblance of that via video conferencing, I think was incredibly helpful.
No, that's great. So have you seen, since fast forward a little bit, a couple months removed from the beginning of this, how do you see employee engagement now and employee morale now? Has it changed? Because I know from my perspective, working from home, I mean, you start to, miss seeing people every day, right?
Sure.
You miss the, being able to, high five someone or fist bump someone for doing a great job or something like that. Maybe speak to that with your organization. How do you see that happening now? And do you see employees adjusting, still adjusting and doing well, or do you see more of a, man, I really want to go back to the office?
Well, and a little of both. So I think, like I said, a lot of us adjusted very well right from the start. Working from home shows how versatile we are as a company and as individuals. That you don't necessarily have to be tied to one environment in order to be successful. And doing that for 2-3 months straight was something that none of us really thought about doing prior to this. But like I said, did very well in doing so, and we're able to be just as productive, if not more productive sometimes, because you don't always have that person coming and knocking on your door.
Sure.
And still getting all of the work done you needed to. Some of us have progressed back into the office by choice. And so I think everyone in our Elkhart office is back in, given the proper safety protocols and that sort of stuff, to make sure that we're all keeping our social distance, wearing masks and stuff when we're outside of our office in the public areas and that sort of thing. But overall, the morale pertaining to the working from home, I don't think necessarily changed at all. I think once we all made sure we were set up in our own offices, I had to take my printer home that's in my office. I had to take my extra monitor home. I always carry my laptop with me just in case, wherever I need it. But I took my second monitor home to give me a little bit more versatility.
Sure.
Forwarded my desk phone to my cell phone, so I took all calls there. For me, it was a fairly easy transition, and I know for a lot of our office staff, it was the same way. For our CSR staff, our customer service staff, we made sure that they took their work phones home and got hooked up properly, so they didn't lose any productivity. So working from home actually did not diminish morale a whole lot from what I saw.
That's great. You made a good point there about continuing to, I guess, work and not maybe take the necessary breaks that you need to take. I mean, it seems like you kind of plow through your day, and if we're in the office, maybe we do get that break we want to take, or go see that colleague, or it seems to be more productive, right? Getting more done. But what is your take on that? Do you think that it's still important to, and how would you maybe give advice to someone who is, continuing to work from home? Would you say, hey, make sure you get those breaks and try to, maybe not plow as hard through your day, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's very easy to, when you're at your office and you're in the routine of working in the office, you get in, you leave home and you get to the office, and that is the official start of your work day.
Right.
A couple hours later, you go get a cup of coffee. You break for lunch sometimes.
Right.
You go grab a cup of coffee in the afternoon from the break room. And then obviously when you leave, for the most part, your day is done.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the way that my day would go. Now, I've always got my email with me, so if something pops up and I have to address it, then I will. But for the most part, it's very easy to unplug at the end of the day unless an emergency comes up. When I was working from home, and when I do work from home, I don't necessarily shut down my computer or turn it off or put it away. It's in my backpack when I get home from work, and unless I absolutely have to, I don't pull it out. But when it's just sitting on my desk, it gets very easy to, oh, I got an email. You see that on your phone, you run over to the desk, pop open your computer, and start answering the email. And then obviously you can get caught in the rabbit hole of just continuously answering emails at that point or doing other work. And so one of the things that I really had to force myself to do was to make sure that I was still unplugging at the end of the day as I needed to.
Mm.
And having a family, I've got a wife and 2 kids, and they're in the house with me at that point. It was fairly easy for me to do that, and I didn't necessarily plug back in unless there was an absolute emergency that I had to address from an HR standpoint. But I would strongly recommend to those who are working from home still create those breaks in your day. If you feel like you're wasting time because you're talking to your spouse or your partner, or you're talking to one of your kids throughout the day, remind yourself, how often are you standing at a colleague's doorway, not necessarily talking about work?
Right.
You want to
Oh,
keep that to
great.
a minimum, obviously, because you want to keep your production level to the point you are at the office. But at the same point, how often are you talking about your fantasy football league, right over a cup of coffee, right when you walk in the door at work, or during a small break you're taking throughout the day? That's the same thing as, taking 10 minutes to go outside with your kids, right?
Right.
So don't necessarily feel like you're not being productive by doing that. It's just in a different manner.
No, absolutely. No, great. That's great, great advice. And so what do you think that companies can do from a strategic standpoint? What strategies can they put in place to maybe help increase morale if they feel like morale is down right now? What are some thoughts and suggestions you may have to help companies adjust to that?
I would say, definitely as much communication as possible, especially for those who, offices are still working from home and people are dispersed throughout their general area. It's very easy to keep people engaged when you can, as a manager or a director, you can walk down the hallway and have a touch point with every single one of the people that you're working with. When you're working from home, that gets a bit more challenging, and it takes more effort to do it because it's not as easy to simply walk down the hallway and chat each person up for a few minutes as you go from one side of the office to the other. So that conscious effort is part of what's going to make that easier. And as long as you have managers and directors and supervisors and just general peers and within the company making that effort to simply reach out and talk to somebody they don't normally talk to on a daily basis, that's going to keep that line of communication as open as possible.
Hmm.
I've suggested to many people who are looking for that, doing like a Zoom lunch where everybody hops on for, even if it's 30 minutes, everybody hops on, or you have different lunch groups, those people hop on in their different Zoom calls, and you just talk for 30 minutes while you eat your lunch. How's the day going? Doesn't even have to be about work, because, when you go to lunch with somebody from the office, you may still be talking about work, but you may not be. So don't feel like you're confined to having to do that all the time. Have those Zoom lunches or a Zoom happy hour after work. 5 o'clock hits, or 5:15 or whatever hits. Everybody finishes up their day, and everybody logs on for 30 minutes to chat real quick before everybody kind of moves on with the rest of their evening, getting dinner going and getting ready for the next day. Those different types of things create, I think, a lot of engagement. And not necessarily around work. You want to be open with communication regarding work and how the company's doing and stuff like that. But creating that engagement outside of the work day or outside of the work purview is going to be just as important. Because then you're still interacting only socially with those people.
No, absolutely. Those are fantastic points. Now, what do you see, say we get to a point where we're able to kind of get back to more of a normal routine. What do you see? What do you see maybe staying with us? Like some of the things we've had to change and some of the things we've had to maybe like Zoom or different tools in our toolbox. What do you see really staying with us as we, maybe continue to progress and hopefully get to a point where we're back to, pre-March days?
Well, one of the things I think you're going to see is a lot of companies really assessing how much office space they need to be paying for on a monthly basis. How much rent do they need and how much office overhead? Especially if a company is doing very, very well and working efficiently and productively throughout this period of time, maybe it does a company does shift to more remote work where, everybody is working from home and, you got a little bit of office space, a smaller office space for when that's needed for meetings and client gatherings and stuff like that. But I definitely see companies reassessing that part of their business and figuring out just how much overhead could they save by having everybody continue to just that's what you do now. You work from home,
right?
Especially if you show you can do it productively. I think Zoom and Zoom meetings and other teleconferencing apps are going to still be a thing. I know I'm looking forward to the day when, we can all gather in a conference room and hash out what we need to for a meeting. I always felt we were, it's incredibly productive to be in the same room. But I think that as productive as we're seeing Zoom meetings and stuff like that continue to be, I know that was a thing beforehand, and that's how you have meetings, with people in different countries at the same time. But it's been thrust more to the forefront now, and I see that continuing to be just as important moving forward. I would be surprised to see a lot of slide back with that, based on how if everybody does continue working from home, that's obviously going to continue to be a thing.
No, absolutely. What about from an HR director's perspective? Is there anything like from specifically to you and to what your day to day is like that you may take away from this and maybe adopt into what you do from an HR perspective?
Well, anything that we do now, I'm always looking at how is this going, how can I apply this to the next issue at hand? So the crisis response plan that I referred to earlier that we put on paper, I wrote that and we implemented it in a way that, yes, it's being driven by the COVID-19 pandemic now, but that's going to be, it's not COVID-19 specific. So, there's certain parameters in place based on what the CDC and the World Health Organization and all of those, all of the authority, all of the sources of authority are giving us. But those parameters will change should another crisis come later. So making everything, even if everything's driven by COVID-19 now, making it so it can still be applied in the future. So should something like this happen again, you're not starting from scratch. You already have at least a very strong foundation of how you're going to react. It's just going to be a matter of the specific details that, the last I's that need to be dotted, the last T's that need to be crossed as far as how you react to that situation specifically. But overall, here's how you operate in general. So anything that we do now, I'm trying to be as forward thinking as possible and thinking outside the box to make sure that everything that we do at this point, whether it's policies implemented, standard operating procedures that we're putting in place and that sort of stuff, making sure that stuff can be used in the future as well. So once we get back to whatever normal will be,
right
after this is all said and done and we see a point where we can call the pandemic closed, being able to refer back to that and say, okay, where did we do really well? Where did we kind of miss the mark? And then where did we just swing and miss? And how are we going to fix those issues so the next time something like this comes around, whether it's as serious or not, how can we be better prepared for it? So the moment something does hit, we're in a much better position than we were to start with.
No, absolutely. So how does someone get a hold of you? Maybe speak to what you guys do in your business, and maybe how someone could get a hold of you guys.
Yeah, so we're an internet service provider, and we have wireless and fiber network in Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. Most of Central Michigan, Southwest Michigan, north and north central Indiana, and then east and central Illinois, kind of like running around along the I-80 corridor and the I-96 corridor in Michigan.
Mm.
So anyone who is interested in broadband service from us, whether it's wireless or fiber, they can call 888-274-6381. That takes you right to our sales staff, and they can start having that conversation with you about where you might be, confirming whether or not you are in our network, and then start talking about how we can get you service. Like I said, that can be wireless or fiber, and it's just going to depend on where you're at, where you're currently living. That's going to determine what type of service you might be eligible to receive.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, hey, great points today, Jeff. Certainly appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with me today and talk about employee engagement and HR. And certainly thank you for your time, and look forward to doing it again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.